Icons of Real Estate, Oregon. Are you ready to learn from the real-life experiences and the proven money-making secrets of Oregon's top producers? If you're an ambitious real estate agent in Oregon ready to skyrocket your business, then this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Maureen Healy, licensed Oregon realtor. Tune in weekly where every guest will have a story to tell and tips to share to help you increase your own business. Brought to you by the Masters in Real Estate Marketing, Arter SEO, and your all-inclusive real estate platform, Icons of Real Estate.
Hi there, everyone. This is Maureen Healy, and I'm your host for the Oregon Icons of Real Estate podcast. I have Robert Delavan here with me today, who is the owner and principal broker with Delavan Realty in Lake Oswego. And I am excited to talk to you, Robert, because you've got a pretty interesting background and you're doing a few things that are pretty unique in our space that I want to touch on. Thank you for taking the time to come over and be with me today.
Happy to do it. I appreciate you being patient with me and my schedule. And it's always fun to do podcasts, especially collaborating with, someone such as yourself who's working so hard to provide content for our industry.
Yes, thank you. I always like to start with a little bit of history and background and then dive in a little bit deeper. Can you tell me how long you've been doing this? And if you had a previous job that was unrelated before, what was it?
Yes. I was licensed in 2011. I started doing real estate professionally in more the commercial world in 2005. I was pretty fresh out of university, a degree in finance with an emphasis in the real estate side. And the job that I had that really actually prepared me, interestingly enough, for this industry was I was phone customer service for Wells Fargo Bank, like at their phone bank. And they actually put me through school. They paid tuition and all sorts of things, which was great. And within about 6 months, I was promoted to, and I'm using air quotes here for those of you who are watching, supervisor, which means that my position went from being in the middle of the cubicle row to the end of the cubicle row. And they would transfer the really big time complainers, I want to talk to your supervisor. Well, guess what? That was like a 19-year-old kid, college student. And it was me. And I had to then deal with that. And that was very, very interesting. And it was deeply influential for how I'm able to communicate with people, especially in high pressure. When somebody's yelling and screaming at you and you're a 19-year-old and this person is a 50-year-old, established, professional doctor, lawyer, whatever it is, their curses hurt just as much as, the person that, is your peer. So that was eye-opening. There was a ton of training involved with that. And frankly, think what you may of Wells Fargo, they prepared me for the professional world incredibly. And I did that for almost 4 years.
That's why I love asking that question, because every person that I've spoken to so far does have a life prior to real estate. And no matter what it is, from what you just told me to another agent that I spoke to who was a Division I college soccer player, there are lessons in everything that translate to this world.
Oh yeah. Not to go down that rabbit trail, but the whole sports world is discipline, hard work, discipline, and feedback loops, and just all of those things. And, whether it's on a pitch or, literally with a headset on for 8 hours a day, the principles underlying that really apply. So that's where it's a lot of fun. Before that, I was a lifeguard.
Oh, that sounds fun. So, that's a little more fun than getting screamed at on the customer service line, I think.
I don't know. You deal with a lot of 9-year-olds that scream at you too. So
it's a little different coming from a 9-year-old though. Good point.
That's fair.
So you were in Wells Fargo land for a few years, and then what?
Well, that was in Southern California. Went to school down at Cal State Fullerton. Go Titans! And after graduating from college, I want to say 03-ish. Later that year, I got married, and my wife and I were living in Southern California, and she was trying to get into nursing school. So we ended up back up here in Portland, which is where I grew up. She did also. Different story, different time. And she got into nursing school up here. I ended up starting working with my folks who were very kind of accidental, but like side landlords. They owned a number of residential rentals that they bought in the 70s and 80s for ridiculously low sums in the Portland metro area. Exactly. Like 10, 20,000. There's a story from my mom that she was mad at my dad. I think their third house they bought and moved into, she was a little bit angry because the monthly mortgage payment was over $100. And I mean, you know, this was like mid 70s. So
sure. But
anyway,
still, I mean, gosh, it's inconceivable. Like,
oh, different world. Now, I mean, I believe their monthly income was like less than $1,000 at the time. So combined. So, I mean, it's all relative to a degree, but they did that. They house hacked. They had a whole bunch of rentals in the 90s. They were kind of mostly paid off. My dad had retired from a day job and they were just kind of doing it very amateurish, but getting by. And they were doing some 1031 exchanges and selling a couple houses and buying commercial buildings, mainly because they just didn't want to deal with messes where people live.
So were you, as a child, noticing all of this, or was it like beyond? Because you know, I know we in my family we had a couple of rentals as well, but I didn't really have any sense of it or know anything until much later. I just didn't, not on the radar.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, it's still, I'm sure, made an impact on you. I mean, look at the industry you're in now, building wealth in real estate, right? Yet the concepts, especially with my folks, like every Saturday morning, I mean, we were, you know, have the family breakfast and then we're off to a rental house, painting a kitchen or something. So yard work. I mean, you know, I definitely knew my way around a shovel and a paintbrush and just all of that growing up. You know, lots of siblings and free family labor, right?
Yeah, so I was going to say,
childhood labor. So fast forward through college, you know, I had moved on and was doing my own thing. And my wife ended up getting into school up here. She ended up at University of Portland. And it was just a natural thing. My folks are like, well, we can't pay you very much, but you could help us. This is kind of becoming a lot. And they were at the time in their late 50s, I want to say. So I just took over. They were doing everything on checkbook ledgers and, you know, no QuickBooks or, I mean, you know, electronic record keeping. Taxes would take a month of work to get ready. You know, the whole shoebox full of taxes.
Oh, no.
You know, it's not a myth. All of that. I mean, that was their reality. And that's how they knew how to do it from decades before. And so I learned how to do kind of everything hands-on, bought and sold a number of properties at that time. This was not by any stroke of genius of my own or my folks. It was just, they wanted to get more commercial stuff and less residential stuff. And we sold the last few houses that they had in their portfolio consistently up to basically like June 2007, the last few. And if you remember, August of 2007 is everything really started to go downhill, and it started to go downhill from a price standpoint very fast in the residential market, and we were out of it.
So that was amazing timing.
It was absolute, just a blessing, right? I mean, this was not genius by anyone's standpoint. It was just kind of happened to be the process. So we bought and sold a few commercial buildings, maintained a lot, did a lot of construction projects. I learned how to, you know, continue to learn how to, you know, hammer a nail properly and sweep the floors and put together deals and deal with financing and deal with banks and all of those things. And then by 2010, 11 came around where the economy was, you know, just kind of had bottomed out and was kind of starting to come back, especially on the real estate side. I was kind of out of projects because we kind of bought and sold and liked what we had and leased up everything. And, you know, kind of from a commercial, you could call it a very amateur commercial flipping enterprise at that point. But we were happy with what we had. They had way better income, stable tenants, happy tenants for the most part. And so I went and got licensed, just thinking, okay, might as well. Didn't really have a plan with that. And then the first year, I think I continued to work with my folks on the commercial side, but I think I sold 3 houses just for friends, family, whatever. I mean, it was just stumbled into it. Like, hey, you do all this, you know, difficult, complicated commercial work, which in hindsight wasn't really that difficult, but, you know, at the time, you can help me buy a house. Okay. So that was kind of where it started. I ended up with a small company, and they're not around anymore, called Source Realty. a good guy
I
that ran
remember
it.
that one.
He let me, he basically sponsored my property management division so that
Okay.
it was legal.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay.
as a principal broker, because I had to be licensed for 3 years to get principal broker. And I mean, there was other routes that I could have gone, but he just said, yeah, no problem. Just don't cause problems. If there's any liability, you got to pay the bill if things come up. Unfortunately, nothing did. And so I started building out a little bit of a property management portfolio, mostly on the residential side. That was the low hanging fruit. And then I just started selling more and more homes. And that got interesting. Then I had some help. 2015, my sister came on. She was a
Family business.
waitress coming out of she got licensed and she was working as a waitress, not making very much money, kind of hand to mouth. And she'd come out of a divorce and, issues that she'd gone through. And I started teaching her. And it really started to just pick up steam about towards the end of 16. I had some conversations with the principal broker that I was working with, and it was kind of end of the year stuff. And this was even early into 17. And we started having these conversations about, hey, I think you should be doing things this way. Let's have a bigger marketing budget. Let's, I want to be able to be a little more agile in how we respond to the business and our budgets and have better listings and, nothing huge, just kind of typical. I was really kind of just starting to grow into my own. At
Leveling
that point,
up.
I think I was selling. Yeah, exactly. I think I was selling at that point, 25, 30 houses a year. I mean, I don't know. You can all check my RMLS stats, but so enough that, there was definitely growth potential. I had help, and we ended up having the conversation, and he's like, Rob, you're kind of like telling me how to run my business and it's not yours. And I was just like, oh, and it took about a week to process that. And then we sat down again and I thanked him for that. And, he had already come to the conclusion that I was going to, move on. And at that point I formed my own brokerage. And so that was 17. And we really didn't pick up steam, 17, 18 was kind of trying to figure things out. And that was a whole nother piece, but the property management piece came with it. And then over the last few years, just all these different relationships that I've had, we ended up founding a contracting services, Delavan Contracting Services. I went into a partnership with some really key, close, strong partners and formed an entity called ROI Tax. We bought out a couple other tax firms that have then folded into that. And one of the key partners is a financial advising firm, which is ROI Financial. And then actually started a foray into, some transaction coordination and just a number of ancillary businesses that really support the pain points of what we do on the real estate side, which is, the hardest thing we do is, trying to like negotiate with actual numbers within a transaction that for the win for our clients, inspection periods and getting properties ready to go up front. And then, after the fact, okay, I bought a fixer. What do I do? And, and then really like, you can't do real estate without tax.
Well, I was going to ask about the tax
and that-
because I've heard of a lot of realtors who also do property management or contracting, and they've made
Yes.
flips and have their own rental portfolio. But I haven't heard of anybody who's doing kind of a tax business in, connection with. So how did you
Right.
decide to do that, and how is that benefiting your business?
Well, I know you're going to ask some other questions about mentorships and growth and that sort of thing. So I don't necessarily need to go into all of that yet. The gist of it is this, and my actual marketing, this is actually a big push for 2023, doesn't yet totally reflect this, at least not the way that I'm really happy with it, that people would understand this intuitively. But the way I explain it is, in essence, hey, people that are building wealth in real estate, they have at least one property. You're going to be wealthier over time than renting. That's a generally accepted concept. Then you start to gravitate towards your key clients, and the key clients that I've gravitated towards over the time, or my avatar, if you will, is somebody who's, usually dual income achievers in the professional world. And, this is $100,000+ a year in, income each, typically, not always, but, or some achievers that are in the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 range right now in today's dollar. And they're achievers and they're really good at what they do. And you go through the process of helping them win in real estate, buying and selling on brokerage. And, they're $10,000 to $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 swings sometimes, depending on the size of transactions and different things and whatever the market conditions are. And you try to leverage as much as possible. Well, what really happened was I kept looking at, okay, well, we're already doing property management. Who are those people? Well, those are those professionals that they make more money doing what they do as a specialty. Mm-hmm. And they're building wealth usually with 1, 2, 3 properties. That was just typical. And it was usually they would buy and not sell. Us realtors, we love the sell and then the buy replacement property, the move up or the move down. Well, oftentimes my clients tend to not sell. They hold. And they hold because we're having that conversation. And over especially the last 5 years, I started to realize that conversation was, if you have a rental property or two and you're a relatively, upper middle class, to upper class income earner, you pay a lot in taxes and you don't have to. Now, I'm not giving tax advice. I'm not a CPA. I know enough to be dangerous, yet, and there's concepts. And then everybody's mileage will vary, based on their individual tax situation and so forth. I always have to give that caveat for the, legalese and so forth. What happens is you have real estate and you need tax planning and advice, and not just to do TurboTax. TurboTax is fabulous for very simple tax situations. As soon as you start getting into moving parts, you actually need to start being strategic. The traditional tax industry also just wants to do taxes during tax season. I call it tax compliance. And they'll do the best they can with the information that's given to them. And you'll generally save money by using a CPA or other type of tax professional, because you can talk through it and they'll be strategic and so forth during tax season. The magic is you really can't be tax efficient and play chess rather than checkers with taxes unless you're tax planning. Tax planning is done in the off season. And tax planning really is financial planning. Sure. Because you're getting into your personal financial situation and you're saying, hey, if I do this, what's the effect on taxes? For us realtors, it's, buying a car every few years, right? And it's got to be over 6,000 pounds. And so we are all buying SUVs and trucks, right? And we're writing off the balance of those, or have historically, in a Section 179. So I need to buy a car anyway. And I might as well, because we're using those in our business, and I might as well buy a brand new one rather than a used one, because I get to write off the entire value. And if that value means that 30-40% of it is in my pocket instead of going to the tax man, it's a no-brainer, especially if I can derive value out of that vehicle over the next 5 years, using it for showings and that sort of thing, pay for it over time, and get the tax savings today, which then I could use for, for example, contributing then to my my SEP IRA, which then my IRA, which is also tax sheltered, is then funded by tax savings. And then your income goes down and you end up in a situation where, okay, I just jumped from real estate to tax strategy to financial strategy. Well, as soon as you max out all of the low hanging fruit of what we call, qualified investments, which are tax sheltered investments. Now, what's the next best thing if you don't own a business? Real estate, from a tax standpoint.
That is a very deep rabbit hole.
It was a deep rabbit hole, and it goes round and round. And you probably understand exactly why I'm having a hard time getting that message without being able to give like a seminar or a podcast, which we do, because it's a circle, and it's, not a vicious circle. It's a positive circle in the sense that real estate leads to tax savvy leads to financial planning and so forth. And financial planning leads back to real estate. And that process, it builds wealth, and it can build wealth actually in an accelerated pace. And it's pretty cool when you map it out.
Sure. So, if you can get to the point of understanding, which I think most base level investors don't have, right? Unless they're an engineer kind of personality type, very
Right.
analytical to begin with. But
Right.
if you can do some education on that and kind of help people understand why it's so beneficial,
Right.
that seems like
And
a
that's
no-brainer for your
that's
business.
the piece, and that's one of the marketing pieces that we're working on over the next. I mean, we're recording this in May of 2023. Over the next about 6 months, we're going to have a series of about 10 tax seminars that really address that. And what happens is everybody has tax questions. Nobody really wants to talk to a real estate broker or a financial advisor because they think they're going to get sold, but tax clients that don't really get enough face time with their tax professional, their CPA during the tax season, because they're, under deadlines and so forth. The tax professional during the off season, if there's a structured teaching educational type component, they get to then ask their questions and go through the process. And that's something that will happen over the summer and fall of 2023 through ROI Tax. Based here in Lake Oswego, we're putting on a series of about 10. And as long as that goes well, which I'm sure that it will, we're probably going to end up doing 15 or 20 a year and draw in, our clients as well as, additional partner clients and so forth with just teaching. And if you're giving, the sales follow.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, we don't have
they
to
come
worry about
know, like, and trust you through that educational process. And then when they're ready, that's a great pipeline.
Exactly. They're going to, I mean, who do you want to handle it other than the expert? Who's the educator? So that's one of the places, that we're going. But the real value, and I think there's a huge future in partnering a brokerage that does traditional real estate, sales, and the ancillary real estate activities, even contracting, property management. Like you said, there's a fair amount of firms that do all of that, not a ton, but some. And if they don't do it in-house, they have partners outside. That long-term, I think where the big picture goal is to actually plant this model, probably in a lot of cities across the country, and it might even end up international. Who knows? But
so, are you thinking of maybe trying to franchise at some point?
Either franchise or corporate owned, but either way, you have to have that key real estate broker who's a real driver and doer, and then a key tax person that's going to lead a team of, however many people, depending on the size of the firm that you purchase, because you're always purchasing. This model requires purchasing a local tax firm.
Sure.
So let's say we end up in Salt Lake City, or Las Vegas or Houston or something, or Seattle. You'd buy a firm there, and then plant a real estate broker and a financial advisor in that office, and basically replicate the same educational model. And
I think
theoretically,
that's very, very unique. I mean,
yeah,
the tax and financial advising side of it is not something I've ever heard of paired with a brokerage. And it does make sense when you explain it that way.
Yeah. Yet your clients that are achievers, they all have a tax person and they all have a financial advisor, but they're not talking to their real estate agent. They're not strategizing on how to structure purchases and sales in the next 5 years during a certain year when income might be up or down, because an Intel employee might take a sabbatical after 7 years. During that sabbatical, their income is way down. That's pretty common because we're close to Hillsboro, where our international people, Intel has international, or has a huge footprint here in the Portland metro area. And they take a sabbatical after 7 years. Well, during that year, maybe that's the year that instead of doing a 1031, which can be difficult, you actually sell one of your real estate assets, because you'd pay less taxes that year because your income was down. And then maybe you save some additional cash on the side so that you could invest on whatever other write-offs you could invest in during that year, so that you could have write-downs to offset the income. It gets in depth you can really play chess instead of checkers. That's what
I was going to say. You're making my head spin a little bit, but in a good way. Yeah. So let's segue into your podcast. Tell me about that. What is it called, and what do you talk about?
It's the Get Rich Slow podcast. And you can find it on Spotify and Apple and all of the other places. That's not really my world, but the main piece that we talk about is we try to dig into a lot of the things that we've just barely touched on here, whether it be the real estate market and the economic struggles, as well as the emotional struggles of like remodeling houses, flipping, those sorts of things. We jump in, we talk about a lot of like financial terms and concepts. And of course we have, the licensed experts talking about those and defining those and so forth. We've done a multiple part series, kind of it's almost our soft opening on like our tax seminars. Okay. Where we've done a ton of tax topics. And then we've also interviewed a lot of people kind of in the format that you're doing with this, where, we interviewed a guy, I've actually known him for a number of years. He kind of accidentally started a business with his parents. Basically it's a goat petting zoo. Oh, like they have little tiny pygmy goats and they're very cute. Oh. And that's exactly how everybody responds. And he built a thriving business through COVID, and it's actually continued to thrive since then, because people love these cute little baby goats, and he brings them to people and, therapeutic type stuff, and then parties and events, and they go to them, they go to their facility too. And it's just, so we've interviewed some very interesting people. We've interviewed a lot of, an architect and financial, like insurance, kind of like supplemental insurance topics that people don't really know a lot about. Do you buy Aflac just because it's a duck on TV? So actually, and there's a few other alternatives to that. We've interviewed those sorts of folks. There's a lot of experts out there. I don't have to be the expert on everything. In fact, I really shouldn't be. Right. Talk to somebody who does it all day long. And then, there's lending we've talked about. So the three of us that do the podcast, Lance Johnson, he's the owner of ROI Financial. And then Adrian Shermer, he's a mortgage person with Director's Mortgage, and then myself. And then, at least half of our episodes, we have at least another guest. So it's fun. We definitely can squirrel from time to time.
It's easy to do.
Yeah, it's very easy to do, especially.
I want to go find that baby goat episode.
It's one of the first ones that we did, actually, and it was a lot of fun. It's fascinating.
I think that's really just, fun and cute. But from a business perspective, that you said he built a thriving business during COVID off of that. That in itself is just a really fascinating story. Yeah.
I mean, he's just a smart guy, super practical. It's, and just built it through Facebook. Like that's where everybody was, social media. So
right. Everybody was
advertised. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just very, just a lot of fun. So we've really enjoyed that. We'll see where that morphs and grows. I mean, the key is just educate, just have content, just help people. Sometimes our brains get so full of all these different things that we just, this format is really nice to just kind of almost have a brain dump too. Mm-hmm. So
let's segue back to your actual real estate business right now. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your superpower?
My personal superpower is actually connecting with people. I couldn't do anything close to what I'm doing without having very high level dedicated people completely buy into the things that I just kind of dream up and end up somehow working most of the time. So it's really connecting. And I've connected with so many people that are just so much smarter than I am, and so much, have my feeling is just so much more to give than I do. And they're telling me like, oh, I like what you're doing. How can I, be part of that? Or even my leaders in the different business entities, they're incredible, especially given that, they're 100% bought into, what we're trying to achieve, which is this bigger, ecosystem of, financial winning, if you will. I always have this little behind me here, making everyday real estate millionaires every day is kind of just a silly tagline that I've come up with, but it's real. I mean, you add 20 years to a real estate portfolio and, you can't say guaranteed, but right. Past history says that, you're going to be pretty wealthy, considering my folks bought their first house for 10 grand. So that piece of it. So superpower is, it's really just, it's connecting, call it the gift of gab. It's obvious if you're listening to this podcast, I can talk ad nauseum, right? And really it's just connecting. And what I've really learned also is then the next step on that is really not focusing on control, but focusing on, getting those really good relationships in place and then getting the hell out of their way and letting them shine and achieve. So that's not my superpower. That's really kind of unleashing others' superpowers. So
sure. You mentioned leaders and leadership in your answer there, and I know that you have some leadership roles within the real estate community. Can you tell me about that? I know you mentioned you're on the board for PMAR and a few other things that you're doing. What kind of positions do you have, and how does that enrich your overall business?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really important to give back. And, we have our philanthropic, we all have our philanthropic, just pure, I want to help wherever we need to. And, Habitat for Humanity, always trying to be involved. I mean, that's huge for their mission, and it feeds right into what we do, real estate and so forth. And I mean, so many folks in our industry, in our metro area. I mean, I've run into so many real estate brokers that are, doing actually so much more for them than I ever have. Easter Seals has actually been, I have a really nice partnership. A client of mine introduced me to them. They place folks that are, kind of 55 to 105 in employment situations and train and connect dots there. And I've been involved really this last year in that, in their fundraising and helping them. And then, I support my kids' school and Tiger Tualatin Swim Club, where my kids are, heavy swimmers. That's fun. Go Turtles, right? So all of those things personally, from a leadership standpoint, just trying to give, try not to give, make sure that we're giving something, and it's not just money, but it's also like projects for them and time and just trying to help as much as possible. All of those people that serve on all of these boards and that sort of thing, they all have day jobs. Nobody's getting rich on the board of a nonprofit. So, really trying to be a doer, rather than just hey, you should do this, and then nobody really does it. You got to jump in and actually follow through with your ideas. But as far as the local, then the next piece is just, I have, including myself, 14 agents within my brokerage, and then, and 30 plus other staff members across the board in supporting our industry, which, it seems like it's always in flux. We're always changing, the real estate industry, the Association of Realtors, national, state, local. I was a little bit voluntold to be, after being on the board of directors for the Association of Realtors Masters Circle, to ask to be the president. So this year I am the president, 2023. And thank goodness the 2024 president has already accepted. So
ready to pass the torch.
Wonderful to pass the torch, and always try to pass it. What you're passing is at a higher level than you received it. And hopefully that'll be the case this year. We're working diligently towards that. And that's just an important group that really highlights the top producers in the region that are making a difference. And so I highly recommend membership in the Masters Circle. The minimum membership, I think, is $2 million a year in sales. And
it's very low bar to meet that threshold.
Exactly. Like you have to be professional, not an amateur, is really kind of what it comes down to. So I highly recommend that. There's some great work that they're doing with actually a number of then additional regional nonprofits and so forth. In addition to that is, I'm also on the board of the PMAR, which is the Association of Realtors locally. And it's been really fun to just be part of those conversations of there's a bit of the associations do kind of steer the ship a bit. Sure. As far as new policies, new procedures, new systems, resources, where resources are allocated. I mean, these entities, some of them, the Association of Realtors, I mean, you're talking well north of $1 million budget a year. They influence legislation. There's a lot of different things going on at that level. And it's important for the real estate brokers that are doing the work to actually, have a say. And, if anybody just throws their hands up and says, oh, well, Portland has bad landlord tenant laws, that those sorts of things. I mean, that's an opinion. The leadership in especially PMAR has allowed me to be a lot closer to the work that's actually being done to try to craft that legislation or influence it positively, which is going to benefit not just us fellow realtors, but also, frankly, property owners across the region.
Sure.
So that's a big deal. And then, who knows where that goes, but I've realized that I really need to always at least be on one real estate board, here moving forward till the end of my career. Just, if nothing else, you rub elbows with people like you, Maureen, that, who knows when, for our clients' benefit, we've spent time together, we've worked on projects together. We know that, there's a relationship there. And it's amazing how often you run into the people over and over again that are really involved. They tend to be the people that are the top producers in the region too. So
that makes sense. And I think it's a really important point when you do have a good rapport and pre-existing relationship with, a broker, and then you end up in a transaction together. There's a much higher likelihood that you're going to work things out, make it go smoothly. Everybody's doing their best. When you come into a transaction with somebody that you have never said a word to, you can kind of tell on that first call or first interaction what their personality is like and how the tone of the whole transaction is going to go. And that can be, positive or negative.
Absolutely.
But if you're out in that world, like you said, rubbing elbows with these higher level producers all the time, and then you end up in a transaction at some point. I mean, Portland is big, but also small in a way. We all run into each other at some point.
Exactly. And that's a big deal. Just to expand on that, I mean, 2023, we're not in the competitive market that we were in 2020, first part of 2022 and 2021. There was at least half a dozen transactions that we did over those, kind of crazy years that were double-digit offers, and we were representing the buyer's side. And we got into contract because we knew them. We knew the other side. They trusted us. We trusted them. We just said, hey, to your client's benefit, where do we need to be? And, it's actually beneficial for the client to get a really good offer with somebody you trust. That's not necessarily, running an agenda that is, the same or better than, where some of the other people came in. And it's not just dollars, of course, it's terms and other things, as we all know, but multiple times that was the case. And it's just because you build rapport. I mean, it's know, like, trust. Well, if you don't know them, how are you going to like them? And then if you like them, you're going to build trust, like, period. But being on boards, being in leadership positions, giving back, educating, all of the things that we've kind of talked about to this point on the podcast, they all lead to the opportunity to know. Then it comes down to, the quality of the person to get into the like trust cycle.
Absolutely.
And just watch the dominoes fall, right? You're going to have success. And that's where a lot of people say the rich get richer, or, success begets success. That's where it comes from, in my opinion. And I see it as a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's really interesting to deep dive into that whole topic. And that's you could talk for days on end just on that alone.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting to hear people's different opinions of that.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Like, the rich get richer, so to speak. That is a whole rabbit trail to go down. Really, what I'm talking about is as it applies to, Maureen, I guarantee you and I run into each other's listing, there's going to be a much deeper conversation because we spent the time to connect and spend this time together. Even if it's a year from now, and we don't talk in between, which, we may or may not, that's a very different level of connection than, just not knowing anybody, so there's just success does beget success. But what people don't, I think, always give the credit for is like, hey, you and I both carved out the time to connect in this way and to share with your audience. So that's really where the success comes from. And you just, if you do this and you try to educate and you help people, you're gonna be better off than the others that aren't doing these activities.
Sure.
So, that's where it's kind of fun.
It sounds like you've got a lot of different irons in the fire. You've got a lot going on and a lot of things that are going really well. You've had a lot of success in the model that you've built. Is there anything right now that's kind of a thorn in your side? Something that you either just dislike, your least favorite thing that you want to outsource, or something that's not going as well as you had hoped?
The next big, it's not necessarily like it's actually not a bad way to say it. I always look at that as what am I trying to accomplish, like big picture, and then you break those down into smaller goals and so forth. Big picture for 2023 that I'm really looking for is I've created this ecosystem. You could call it like I don't know, you go to Costco for everything, right? A Costco model, like there's a whole bunch of different products, not just one thing. This ecosystem though, that works together, what I'm really working on that I'm not where I want to be yet is, and I alluded to it a little bit in the marketing piece, but it's really more of it's marketing as it relates to once you start to get like 2 or 3 levels down, does my contracting office manager get the big picture concept? And does she know and have a go-to person in the tax side, even though they work in the same building and they say hi to each other and they've gone to events together, together when we host and that sort of thing? The answer is probably no, not really. And you don't want to minimize the influence of an office manager just by default of not paying attention to the fact that she's not necessarily rubbing elbows in an intentional way to get the opportunity for that know, like, trust feedback loop, right? So that's the piece where, yeah, I get it and I can talk about it all day long, but until like the next level down and my leadership team gets it, and then what about the team that works for them? And is that team that is really the next generation, if this becomes a legacy, do they connect and really dial in with, let's say, the folks that, maybe they're more on the front lines today and they get their processes and procedures and so forth, but they're going to be the leaders tomorrow. And to do that as we grow, what's that look like? Are they really taking that ownership of, or do they feel empowered to actually see this as an ecosystem rather than just people that we see when we do our quarterly events? So that's, and it's hard to quantify that. But that's the thorn in the side of, man, there's so much more potential that we're doing. Are we marketing? Are we getting the message across to all the people in-house and all the clients in-house, much less even all the employees and independent contractors, depending on what they are, as real estate brokers and so forth? Are they all working towards that same goal? Because many hands leads to a light load, right? So,
well, I was going to say, and each person that works in your company is sort of like a brand ambassador out in the world. If somebody says, hey, where do you work? What do you do? Right. I'm sure would like them to articulate it in a way that people will get it.
Exactly.
And draw them in, right? And pique their curiosity.
Exactly. And the onerous, the biggest responsibility on that is on me in this, and my partners and so forth is on me, because if it takes me a rabbit hole and, half an hour to really explain it, how do I distill that down to the essence? Right. Do you have an
elevator pitch for this?
Exactly. And I do, it's simple. I won't repeat myself. I can get that across in context. It's really easy to get that across to a client that has, 2 or 3 rental properties, right? And they're building wealth in real estate and they're already doing, this, as I try to point, they're already, making everyday real estate millions every day. Right. And they get it. And that's easy. The question is, what about the people that just don't know what they don't know, but could be there? but they literally don't even understand the concept. They just watch HGTV and they're like, oh yeah, I like pretty houses and I'd love to be a landlord. So, that's the long lap around one of my big goals this year is to really go a couple layers deep on the ecosystem truly thriving as, like you said it, and actually I probably will repeat your words there, brand ambassadors across the board of all 40 plus people that work within our company, or companies.
That's a huge goal, and
Oh, yeah.
it's an awesome goal. I mean, what you've already accomplished is very impressive, and to roll it out even deeper and kind of perfect this model before you take it even wider, I think you'll be able to do it. I mean, you're obviously very tenacious and have a good head on your shoulders for it. So, and you got, like you said, you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you.
Yep.
Right? That's the way. That's the path.
Yeah. I'm really, let's do like annual or, 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, just where we're at today compared to, we've been at a couple events, and, by the time you have, all of the folks that are working within the companies and, families attached to that, and there's like 80, 100 people there, when, 6, 7 years ago, it was like 4 of us.
Sure.
It's kind of like, huh, that's interesting.
Something's
so
working.
and that's where you almost forget where you've been to a degree. Like, it's just, you have to stop and think about that sometimes and kind of get a little perspective and say, oh, okay, I guess it's we're a lot farther along than we maybe give ourselves credit for. So.
It is interesting to kind of look back at the history book of your business, over time. And I don't know if you have a way that you note that somehow and reflect annually or something, but it is, I think, especially the farther down you go, like once you're 10 years in,
right,
15 years in, it'll be even more interesting to look back at those early years and compare.
It's really fun, especially when you have, this could be a whole topic in and of itself, but if you have your financials dialed in and have like heavy bookkeeping, that's super accurate, and therefore taxes aren't that hard, and tax planning is actually much easier. But if that's consistently happening, and that's been happening for me since about 2014, 15, where I really had kind of the right people doing books and so forth, you can really follow the metrics. And, QuickBooks is a powerful thing in that you can see income growth, gross, net, expenses. It's really a lot of fun to actually, as you say here, Maureen, it's just like, whoa, I can see those metrics. And then of course, journaling and notes, and, I have all of that and try to save it. And it's interesting to just randomly go back and search for something and be like, oh man, what was I thinking there? we learn from our mistakes more than we learn for our wins, generally speaking. So
I was going to say, are you sure you didn't miss your calling? Maybe you were meant to be a CPA.
I can't stand the actual like creating all of the documents. Don't get me wrong. I love a good financial report because you can get so much out of it. And I mean, that's why real estate transactions are so much fun. You can look at a closing statement and look at an RMS listing, and you can like connect the dots. And then you start to, if you know a few of the people that are involved, like, their tendencies. I mean, it's really gets interesting. You can almost predict how that transaction went and what happened and who won and who lost. And, it's a kick. So
it's kind of fun peek behind the curtain.
Absolutely. It's maybe a little dangerous sometimes, but anyway, yeah, it's fun.
One thing I always like to ask people is, what would be your best piece of advice for either someone who's a brand new agent or an agent who maybe isn't doing the volume that they would like to, and has a goal of, like myself, would love to double my business this year? What do you think are the golden nuggets?
There's a few steps, but I'm going to say kind of my favorite one, which is like an agent that's doing, 10, 20 deals a year. Which means their gross revenue is, in our market, with an average sale of, 500 to 800,000, depending on where you're at, you're grossing, 150 to, maybe 100 to to 250,000 and you're spending 25% of that to get that. The biggest single thing that agents don't realize as soon as they hit that 100,000 a year mark is they need to start offloading things. And there's two places where you do that. Number one is as soon as you know how to do the paperwork, you should offload the paperwork. And it's a transaction coordinator. And I mean, read Gary Keller's book, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. The first
I have
person
it on my nightstand right now, actually.
There you go. Is transaction coordination or some sort of assistant role. And
Sure.
I actually dial that even more too, like a really good transaction coordinator, because it's a flat fee per transaction.
Mhm.
And you're usually in our market, you're paying $400 for a crummy one and $600 for a really good one. And there's a difference. And I just say, pay the $600. Yes, you're not going to like writing that check out, but out of $10,000 gross commission, $600 is very, very worth it.
Worth every
And you're
penny.
going to take 50% from a really good transaction coordinator, 50% of the work of the actual transaction is off your plate for $600.
Mhm.
So that's number one. It frees up time. And the first month or two that you do that, don't go try to get more business. Don't try to do other things. Literally just go take a nap. Like just
I love that.
when I say that, just it's just a personal thing. Like give yourself a little bit of bandwidth and be okay with, hey, 40 hours a week is okay. I don't have to do 60
Mhm.
to feel accomplished. Don't be busy just to be busy. So give yourself some bandwidth. You're already doing something right to get 10 plus deals a year. Then once you have that transaction coordinator, you also offload bookkeeping. And the reason why you can do that is because as soon as you offload bookkeeping and get with your CPA and tax person, you're going to, at $100,000 a year, you're going to have an S Corp. And you're going to save typically almost all of my agents, once they hit that spot, they do an S Corp and they save between, and this is between Oregon and federal, but they save between like $2,000 and $10,000.
I learned that lesson myself a couple of years ago, and I did my
Yep.
S Corp, and I wish I had done it sooner, but of course you don't know what you don't know, but it's done now.
Every agent that's achieves does that. And what that S Corp really requires you to do though, is you have to do payroll, which means you have to be disciplined financially and pay yourself a set amount every month. You don't actually have to pay yourself the dollars, but you have to pay the taxes as if you did.
Right.
So you pay your taxes every single month. Now you're not struggling quarterly or to catch up, and you're saving money. And then you can do like a SEP IRA, or like then you start building, and that's where you're starting to play chess, even as a real estate broker. And the crossover point is somewhere around that, 10 deals, give or take, depending on what your market. If you're in a market that averages $200,000 a year, in I don't know, like Alabama or something,
Right.
that's maybe a little different, but somewhere around $100,000, maybe a little less. My agents do it a little less just because we have the affiliation with it. We're
Sure.
part of our firm is taxes. So it's those are the two things. So, and sometimes it's hard to pay the $250 a month for bookkeeping. And it's hard to pay the $600 per transaction for transaction coordination. But just because you know how to do QuickBooks, just because you know how to do, real estate forms and that sort of thing, doesn't mean that you should. Fill your tank back up, and then roll with, like, hey, I'm energized, I'm charged up. So let's actually, like you're happy when you get that call rather than, oh my goodness, another lead to follow up with, or, another person. Like you're exhausted. You should be ecstatic, yet because you're doing all these, let's call them $25 an hour tasks instead of $100 an hour tasks. For every $25 an hour task hour that you spend, you're not doing that $100 an hour activity.
It makes total sense when you think about it in that way. And I'm really glad that you are talking about taking a break, taking a nap, and refilling your own cup, because the exhaustion is real for sure. And you're going to get to a burnout point, and your performance starts to slip, not only in bringing in new clients, but how effective you're being in a transaction. Your negotiation skills, your sharpness deteriorates if you just are overcome with exhaustion all the time. So I think that's a great point that no one else has said. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, you'll hear it again. But it's also, what it really does is it prevents you from being present when you're burnout. You're not going to be in that moment. So, and that's huge. And, from there, it's just a matter of like, then you just incrementally build. You go to 20 transactions from 10 and you're like, wow, I'm not working as much as I did when I had 9 because I have and they make you look like $1 million. A really good transaction coordinator, they do everything for you. It's awesome. And the client is just like, oh my gosh, you walked out the door, I'm texting them, hey, here, we've already done our pre-listing stuff. They already had all the documents. It's literally in their inbox to sign. A schedule is already set up. Like signs are already ordered. I mean, it's crazy, with the booties, with the little marketing flyers, with all the things, and you didn't have to do it.
Right. Great systems.
Yeah. So,
well, I want to wrap up with a segue from your point about giving yourself a break and a rest. What do you like to do outside of real estate? What do you do for fun?
Well, the biggest thing is
in all your free time.
Yeah, right. I've found that travel is my wife and I and my kids' favorite thing. So we travel about 8 weeks a year. Not all at once, because that becomes too much. But we tend to almost always say yes when somebody invites us to something that's not here, even somebody that we maybe don't know that well. We've always just kind of made that a priority, that we want to have experiences, not stuff.
Yep.
And I love that. That's just been a really just big push. We're going to go this summer sometime around the 10th of August. We're going to go on a cruise with some friends from the East Coast that have kids about our same age. They got married, I think, a day before we did 20 years ago, cool. This August. And we happened to meet them at dinner on a cruise ship on their honeymoon and on our honeymoon.
Oh, fun.
And we've been cruising ever since. And some people don't like cruises. They feel, for whatever reason, doesn't matter. I don't care whether you like cruises or beaches in, the Nepali coast or, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Travel's our thing, and it's really time away. And I've really built, that's one of the big things that I built all of our systems around. I can unplug for, generally speaking, for a week or two at a time, and it's generally business as usual. So that's been a lot of fun. Travel. Our kids do swim team. We're in the middle of kids sports, volleyball for my daughter, baseball and basketball for my son. So, sports is kind of our thing. They're 13 and 10 now. So I think for the next 5 years, kids sports is going to kind of be a hobby. It's really kind of built up, especially when they start doing club sports and stuff. So that's a lot of fun. I will say that it's actually more fun to watch a kid grow and develop in a specific sport or discipline than it was when I played it, which is really interesting. So I never would have thought that. I mean, I remember just the sports dads way back, like, oh man, why is your dad always here? And it was like, now I'm like, I get it. So, and it's pretty cool. And then, I'm a big reader, and I don't snowboard as much as I'd like. I play basketball still in what I call the old man Portland basketball leagues, and, that sort of thing. And then it's just spending time with people. So
sounds like a nice full life, well-rounded. And, balance is hard. And, sometimes the pendulum swings deeper one direction, but to have those elements sprinkled throughout your week, you're going to kids games, and then, you have your travel plans coming up throughout the year. That is fantastic, and not something that everybody prioritizes or can achieve.
Right. Right. It's just, and it really, you said it, it's priorities. You decide how you're going to spend your resources. It's not just dollars, it's actually time.
Well, I was going to say, that's the one thing, we can't get our time back.
Exactly. Ever. You can kind of buy time. You can easily earn more dollars with time, but you can't really get, like, the time never comes back.
Right.
So that's the systems, people, leadership, all the things. It's really been a big driver. And frankly, just having those relationships with those people you trust. We're not going to agree, I promise. I think one of my hobbies is actually like getting into a debate with my business partners about which direction we should go. And it's really fun as long as we all know that we're coming from a place that we want, assured mutual success.
Right.
So,
the goal
rather
is the
than
same.
Ego contests don't work very well. So.
Well, thank you so much for all of your time today. This has been great. And we got into some topics that I haven't touched on before on the podcast. So I think that makes it even more interesting for other agents to hear all these different facets of where this job can take you that they may have never thought of otherwise.
It's a lot of fun, and sky's the limit. It's kind of whatever you want it to be, so
Sure.
and I don't know, I know I'm weird in that way, but it's, you find a need, you fill it, and then do it really, really well.
Mhm.
So it's a blast. I've been very blessed, and frankly, there's a lot of future things that I haven't even imagined at this point. I don't even know what I don't know yet. So
Mhm.
anyway,
Well, I appreciate you
it'll be
sharing
fun.
all the knowledge that you have gathered so far. And one thing that we always like to do here at the Icons of Real Estate podcast is offer people who are listening a way to reach out to you if they would like to connect with you. So what, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah. Well, I always give, website, you can go to Delavan, DELAVAN -realty, REALTY.com. My personal cell number, I might regret this, is 503-956-4275. Text is better than voicemails, but I generally, return all phone calls, direct contact. Email Robert at Delavan-realty.com. Is another way, although you might get some of my helpers rather than me on email. So that gets pretty full pretty fast.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. And I've learned some things from you as well, which is always a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, and appreciate your time here. This is going to be fun to see where this goes. We'll definitely have to do it again.
Definitely. Have a great weekend.